Boker Tov is that Yomi is Nedarim Ayin Vav, Nedarim 76, but we're going to start on the bottom of 75b, 6 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is discussing a dispute from the Mishnah as to between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, where the Mishnah has said, and everybody agrees, that a husband cannot uphold the vows of his wife in advance of her making them. The husband cannot say, I uphold your vows, whatever you're going to make. That's not effective. But what about, can he reject the vows in advance? So Rabbi Eliezer says he can, and based upon a Kal V'chomer, if he can reject them once they're made, for sure he can reject them in advance. And the Rabbanan say he can't. So the Gemara then asks the question, according to Rabbi Eliezer, what's the nature of him rejecting the vows in advance? Do they never apply in the first place? Do they never take effect? Or do they take effect and then immediately or within a few seconds they're revoked? The Gemara is discussing that. So on the bottom of 75b, the Gemara tries to bring a proof to say that they never take effect. And what's the proof? That the Gemara has a brisa which discusses the conversation between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. That the Rabbanan responded to Rabbi Eliezer's statement by saying, Amru lo Rabbi Eliezer. The sages responded to Rabbi Eliezer because Rabbi Eliezer had said that if it can revoke it, if the husband can revoke it once it's made, for sure he can revoke it in advance. And the rabbis said to Rabbi Eliezer, Uma mikvah, just like a mikvah, shemal asat me'am mitumasan. And if a person goes into the mikvah and then he comes out of the mikvah, he's ritually pure. But nevertheless, ein ma'atil al tahorim milatameh. So the different ways to read this. Some just read it simply that if he comes out of the mikvah, he's still able to become tameh. But others read it as if he goes into the mikvah while he's holding something inside of his stomach, while there's a ring inside of his stomach, then that ring will remain tameh. Adam she'ein ma'as tameh mitumasan. A person, he's not capable of making something from tahor, from tameh to tahor. Shouldn't it for sure be the case that he's not able to prevent something that was tahor from becoming tameh? But the fact is that if a person walks into if he walks into a town with a dead body and he has a ring inside his stomach at the time, then even though the person becomes tameh, he's preventing the ring itself from becoming tameh in the first place. And so we see that the person can prevent something from becoming tameh, even though he himself cannot save something from becoming that is tameh from becoming that is tameh already. So we see from here. The point is the Rabbanan are responding to Rabbi Eliezer that saying that just because you can revoke something that once it's tameh, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can prevent something from becoming tameh in the first place. Because just like the mikvah can prevent something from that can revoke something once it's tameh, but it nevertheless cannot prevent something from becoming tameh in the first place. So to a person who cannot prevent something from becoming tameh in the first place, for sure he shouldn't be able to save something from becoming tameh. But anyway, we see from the Chachamim's argument that the whole concept was that the person, shouldn't he be able to prevent something from becoming tameh in the first place? So that proves that the argument is about whether or not something will take effect in the first place. So, and I'll read the Mefarish here, and the Mefarish here will explain it. It says, Uma mikvah shamala. So this is how the Mefarish explains it. Hachi pirusha. This is how we understand it. Hachi pirusha shal shem Uma chacham shemala kama shekim abal. Just like the chacham who can be mala the akama that the husband upheld. Shematir la ein matil al adam shem yadar lo yet. Just like the chacham who can be mekayim the vow of if the chacham was mekayim his, if the person was mekayim his vow that he can annul the vow, he's not able to prevent the person. That if the person will make the vow, he can't say it will not be a vow. Adam she'enu malatim, and this is how he explains it. So afbal nami she'enu yachol hafer hakamaso, just like the husband who is not able to reject his hakama elam kein yishal chacham, unless he asks the chacham, eno din shouldn't for sure be the case she'enu mefer benidrei ishto, that he's not able to reject the vows of the wife. Kodem shenadra she'enu mo kluma she'efer kodem shetider shelo Nedarim. So basically, so too, the husband's vows should not be able to prevent if he rejects it prior to being actually done. But the point of this, the reason why the Gemara brings this here is to show that the basis of the Rabbanon's question is that the neder didn't take effect in the first place. So doesn't that prove, to answer our question, says basically the Gemara is saying that, doesn't this answer our question that Rabbi Eliezer is saying that he prevents the vow from taking place in the first place? So the Gemara says, but wait, we're not going to be able to say that, because why? Because there's a brayso, in the brayso there's a series of questions that the Chachamim are throwing against Rabbi Eliezer, and Ema Seifa, in the next clause that the Chachamim say to Rabbi Eliezer in this brayso, so they said to him as follows on top of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. They said to him, Amru Rabbi Eliezer, Imat Bilin Kli Tamei L'Taher, if you're allowed to take a utensil that is tamei and immerse it in the mikvah in order to make it tahor. So if you take a utensil which is tamei, you're allowed to immerse it in the mikvah in order to make it tahor. Yatbilu l'taher, yatbilu kli l'kashayitame l'taher. Shouldn't we also be allowed to immerse a utensil in advance so that when it becomes tamei, it will become tahor? But we don't say that. We don't say that you're allowed to immerse a utensil in advance so that if a sheretz falls inside the kli, it will become tahor. It's not an effective way of doing it. And so too, you can't say that just because you can revoke a vow, so too in advance, you could revoke the vow as well. So, but we see from here, Shema Mina, but from the fact that we're saying here, the implicit in this question is that once you become tamei, it will become tahor. So we see from here that they're understanding chayalin, that the vow is taking effect, and then he's trying to revoke it in advance. So that we see from the Rabbanon's point to Rabbi Eliezer here that he's saying that the vow does take effect and then it's revoked. So from the Reisha of this brayso, we're saying the vow doesn't take effect, but from the Seifa of the brayso, we're saying the vow takes effect and then it's revoked. So which is it? So Amri, so the Bnei Yeshiva, the students in the yeshiva who are steiging away, they said, Rabbanon lo kaimi lahon v'taimei Rabbi Eliezer. That the way to understand this is the Rabbanon, they don't really understand Rabbi Eliezer's. They're not 100% sure what Rabbi Eliezer's svara was. They didn't understand his reasoning. This is what the Rabbanon said to Rabbi Eliezer. My svira lacha. What's your logic? If you want to say that really the vows take effect and then he's knowing them in advance to have a kli yuftech. So we're going to refute you from the case of the mikvah, of the utensils in the mikvah. That just like you cannot annul, just like you can't get rid of the tumah in advance, so too you can't get rid of the vows in advance. And if you want to say that the vows, and if you want to say the vows never take effect, they have a mikvah to yuftach, then we'll say that the case of the mikvah will be a refutation, because in the case of the mikvah, we're saying, shouldn't it prevent it from ever becoming tamei in the first place? And so we see from here that he's saying, meaning to say, from the case of the mikvah, we're saying it doesn't prevent it from ever becoming tamei in the first place. And so that shows that the Rabbanim were saying that Rabbi Eliezer's logic was that vow, that he wants to reject the vow, so he prevents it from ever becoming a vow in the first place. So therefore, the Rabbanim are saying that even no matter what you say, we have a svara from another case to refute your logic. Whether or not you say it never takes effect, we refute you from the case of the mikvah. And if we say it takes effect and then revoked, we refute you from the case of the utensils in the mikvah. So the Gemara the Gemara has not answered that question yet of whether or not Rabbi Eliezer says it takes effect and is then revoked, or it never takes effect in the first place. So Tashma, the next attempt is Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said, Umaz Zerayim Tameim. So the next attempt comes from that Rabbi Eliezer said to the Chachamim. He responds to the Chachamim and he says, just like seeds that once they are tamei, kivin shezaron bekarka tahorin. Once seeds that once they are tamei, if you take these tamei seeds and then you plant them in the ground, then they're going to become tahor. Kivin shezaron bekarka tahorin. Zeruyim va'omdim or kol shekain. If they are planted already and standing there in the ground, for sure it should be tahor. And so therefore, but you should admit to me in this case that nevertheless we're going to say nevertheless that wouldn't you say that if there are seeds that once they're in the ground, that if they were tamei, they become tahor. So if the seeds are standing already in the ground, wouldn't you admit to me for sure that they don't become tamei in this case since they're attached to the ground? And you also admit that, even though it's not explicit in the Torah. And so we see from here that it's a kal v'chomer, that even though it's not explicit in the Torah, it's a kal v'chomer, that if something could be revoked, if its status of tamei could be revoked by being planted in the ground, for sure if it's already in the ground, for sure under those circumstances, it's not going to become tamei. And so therefore, we should make the same kal v'chomer about with rejection of the vows. That if it works to reject a vow once it's made, for sure, before the vow is made, it can be rejected. But anyway, we see from here, Shema Mina, Lo Chayo, and we see from his logic, because he's saying that for sure it can't become tamei once it's in the ground, that Rabbi Eliezer is of the position that the neder is not chal at all. That he's saying if it can be rejected once it's tamei, then for sure if it's standing in the ground, it can't become tamei at all. So we see from here that it must be at a position that it can never become tamei at all. And the reason is so that Rabbi Eliezer must be saying that we're saying that the reason that they reject the vow and it never takes effect at all. The neder never took effect. So Rabbi Eliezer's logic. So we've answered that question. Now Rabbi Eliezer says that neder never takes effect in the first place. So basically, the Rabbi Eliezer has said to the Rabbanon that the proof from my logic is that since the neder can be revoked once it's made, for sure it can be revoked in advance. So the Gemara now asks the question, well, what's the problem with that kal v'chomer? It's a very simple argument. It's a logical argument. Don't the rabbis also expound that same logical argument? Don't we have a brisa that makes a similar argument? The brisa says, Yachol yimkor adam es bito kishinara. You might think, we know it's halacha that a father could sell his daughter to be a slave until she's the age of 12, which point she'd have to get married to the person he sold her to, or he has to release her. And he did this because he was trying to save her life from starvation. So he's allowed to sell his daughter when she's a minor girl, when she's under the age of 12. I might think that he could also sell her off when she's a naro, when she's above the age of 12 till 12 and a half. Amr's kal v'chomer, we say, no, he can't do it. Mechura kvar, you would say that if she was sold, then when she reaches the age of 12, she goes, either she marries the father or his son, and she goes, or else she goes free. Eina mechura, then if she was never sold before the age of 12, eino din shelo timaka, for sure she can be sold at the age of 12. So we see from here that it's a logical argument that if something if he's allowed to do, if she goes free at the age of 12, for sure she can't be sold above the age of 12. So that's a logical kal v'chomer. So how could the Rabbanan argue with this type of kal v'chomer, which are arguing in our case as it relates to vows? So the Gemara answers on the top of 76b in. You know what? You're right. That is a logical kal v'chomer. The Rabbanan don't have a problem with this concept of a kal v'chomer. In general, the rabbis do agree with this concept of a kal v'chomer. Mishani Acha is just in this case that they argue the Amar Kra Isha Yikimenu Isha Yifirenu. Because The verse says specifically, the husband shall uphold the vow, the husband shall reject the vow. But we make a hekesh, we make a comparison. Et shabal chal hakim, those vows which can be upheld, i.e., only those vows that were explicitly made. Those vows can be explicitly rejected. Et shalo balachal hakim, but those vows which were not specifically upheld, they can't reject them. He can't reject them, and so therefore he cannot reject the vows in advance, and it's based upon the fact that it's comparable to Akama, but not based upon the fact that logically you would say you would be able to reject them, but the fact is this is a specific case because of the verse. So now we're on to the next Mishnah. It says the Mishnah, Hafaras Nedarim Kol Hayom, that the person has the ability to reject the vows the whole day. The husband or the father has the ability to reject vows the whole day. This is based upon the fact that the pasuk says, or it says about the husband, so we see from here that the husband or the father has the right or the ability to reject the vows that day. But there is within this ability to reject the vows that day, the day that he hears it, there's actually a leniency or a stringency. But the Rad already says this is not this terminology, leniency and stringency is lav davka, meaning it's not exactly the way we normally understand the words leniency and stringency, because this is really not the right nomenclature to use here. But this is what it means. Sometimes you have more time and sometimes you have less time to annul the vows. And it's coming to exclude the case of 24 hours, which is what our Gemara is going to talk about. So Ketzad, so the Mishnah, going back to the Mishnah, how would this be the case? Nadra b'leilei Shabbos. Let's say she took the vow on Friday night. It would be the same case if she took the vow during the week. The only reason why it's telling us Friday night specifically, says the Ram, is it's teaching us milsa agav orcha. It's teaching us something in on the way, agav orcha, on the way. It's teaching us that you can annul the vows on Shabbos, even though it's not for the purpose of Shabbos. And that will be a big discussion in tomorrow's daf. So let's say she makes the vow on Friday night, Yafer b'leilei Shabbos. He has all night to annul the vow. Ubi Yom HaShabbos. He has all day until sunset on the next day. That is teaching us that once the sun sets on the next day, he can no longer reject the vow. So he has it from the nighttime all the way until the next day to reject the vow. So now our Gemara is going to bring a dispute about this amongst the Tanaim. Tanya, the Gemara has a braysa, Faras and the Nedarim Kol Hayom. You have all day, the whole day to annul the vow. Whereas Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon said, no, you don't have till the day expires. But you have me'es leis, mean to say you have 24 hours. So according to the first position here, the Tanakama, let's say they make the vow at 12 o'clock and sun sets at 6. So if she makes the vow at 12 p.m. and sun sets at 6 p.m., he has 6 hours to annul the vow. So from 12 to 6. But according to Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, if she makes the vow at 12 p.m., she has 24 hours. She has till the next day at 12 p.m. He has till 12 p.m. on the next day to annul the vow. So it's called me'es la'es, from that moment till the next moment. So my time at the Tanakama, what's the reason why the Tanakama say they have until the end of the day? It's based on the fact that the verse says on the day he hears it, biyom, on the day. So he has until the remainder of the day. Rabbana my time, but Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who are here called the Rabbanan. So what's the reason why they have 24 hours? Because it says in the if her husband was silent from one day until the next day, which implies 24 hours. So what is the Tanakama? The first position just says you have until the end of that day, until sunset. What does he do from the fact that it says that the husband has from one day until the next day? It's teaching us the following. You need it. Why do we need it? The Yom Shamo, because if it was just on the day that he actually heard it, Havamina, I would have said, I would have said that you can never annul the vow at night. But now we're saying that, let's say she makes the vow in the middle of the night, you could also annul the vow at night, that night. And so therefore, it's to teach us miyom el yom, to teach us this idea that the time of the rejection of the vow is really 24 hours a day, meaning to say you can reject the vow even at night or the day afterwards. But that's only where she heard the vow at the beginning of the night, that he can reject, where he heard the vow at the beginning of the night, that he could reject the vow that entire night and the next day. But if he hears the vow during the day, he doesn't have that period of night time to reject the day. So that's what the Tanna Kama is saying. The Tanna Kama is saying you have until the end of the day, even if that day started at nighttime, you have all of that night leading up to the conclusion of the day, which is sunset. And word about to the Rabbanan, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon would say that you have 24 hours. What do they do with the fact that it says to be Yom Shama? And the one who says that you have 24 hours, Biyom Shamo, he says on the day he hears it. So the Gemara says, well, what do you do with Biyom Shamo? It's drach. I'll tell you why he needs it. If he just said 20 Yom Yom from one day to the next, I would have thought it's from 1 week to the next week. From the first day of the week till the next time it's the first day of the week. So wait for what? That's when he can reject it. So therefore, it says on the day he hears it, means that you only have 1 day, a 24-hour period. So then, Rabbi Shimon ben Kazi, Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, the law is not like Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, who say that you have 24 hours to reject the vow, but the law is like the Tanna Kama, who says you have just till the end of that day. Amrle Rav, and Rav says, Hachi Amar Chabibi. Rav referred to his uncle who is Rabbi Chia, as Chabibi. So he says, this is what Chabibi says. He says that you can revoke the vows just for that day. You don't have 24 hours. And he said, the law is the law is not like Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, but you only have till the end of that day. Now, since the Gemara cited that Rav at halacha with Rav Paskin, and it refers to Rav's uncle who is Rabbi Chia, and Rav calls him Chabibi, his beloved. So now the Gemara tangentially tells us another halacha which was cited by Rav's son, who Rav must have named for his uncle, because Rav's son was Chia. He must have named his son for his beloved uncle. So Rav says, so the Gemara tells us, Chia barav shadi gira ubadek. So Chia barav used to shoot an arrow and check. What does this mean? So the Ran tells us, while Chia barav was shooting arrows, he would check the person who was coming before him, Lahatir Nidro, who was coming to have his vows annulled, Visholo, and he would ask him imischare to matiro, and he would ask him if he regrets his vows, and then he would annul it. Because the Kasavar Postam Becharata, he would say, you can use as regret as a way of annulling a vow. And so therefore, he wouldn't need to investigate so closely to find the Pesach. As we said many times, that there are two ways of annulling a vow. One is through regret, which is very simple. Do you regret having made the vow? Or do you require a Pesach? Some information, if you had known when you made the vow, if you had known this information, would you have made the vow in the first place? So Chia Barav, he would use regret, which is much simpler and easier way of annulling a vow. If somebody came before him and said, I annul the vow, he would just say, yeah, we can annul your vow on the basis of regret. But so much so, he would use regret, he would take it so flippantly that when the guy came before him to have his vows annulled, he would be shooting the arrows, meaning he would be involved in another task. Why? He's teaching us if somebody regrets something and they're coming before this great rabbi to have their vows annulled, he wouldn't torture the person. He wouldn't make him go crazy. He would say, okay, you regret it? No, good enough for me. And he'd shoot the arrow. I mean to say he was doing this as a way of giving the guy a break, making his path to return much easier by saying, you regret what you did? No problem. It's okay with me. And that's a very powerful concept, that if somebody regrets their actions, we go very easy on them and we allow them back. We don't torture them. And also, Badik Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, Yasif V'Kaim, and so too Rabbi Rav Huna, when he would investigate a person, he would also be sitting and then standing. Meaning to say you wouldn't like he was expecting him. You wouldn't be specific. You wouldn't make a point of it to sit and to go over it carefully, because he said you can use regret as a way of annulling a vow. So let me just stop the recording because that's today's daf.